The morning mist clung to the French countryside like a burial shroud, and through the gray void that swallowed everything beyond 30 meters, Panzer Commander Karl Hoffmann peered into uncertainty. It was September 19, 1944. In the rolling fields of Bison-la-Petite, Lorraine, and Hoffmann's hands trembled, not from the September chill, but from what had just materialized from the fog like a specter of mechanical impossibility. An American tank destroyer had appeared from nowhere, fired twice with surgical precision, and vanished before his gunner could traverse their turret even halfway toward the threat. The burning hulk of another Panther 50 meters to their left testified that this was no hallucination born of war-weary minds. The 42 Panthers of the 113th Panzer Brigade had rolled into battle that morning with the supreme confidence of men who believed in their mechanical superiority. These were the pinnacles of German engineering. 75mm high-velocity guns mounted on chassis protected by sloped armor that could deflect most Allied shells. These crews had been told repeatedly that American armor was inferior, hastily assembled, mechanically unreliable contraptions manned by inexperienced crews who relied on numerical superiority rather than tactical skill. What they encountered in the fog-shrouded fields around Arracourt would shatter every assumption about armored combat they had carried from the brutal lessons of the Eastern Front. The M18 Hellcat, a name they would learn only through capture or survival, was about to demonstrate that the Americans had reimagined tank warfare itself. They had traded armor for a speed that rendered traditional tank tactics as obsolete as cavalry charges against machine guns. The development of this revolutionary vehicle had begun not as a response to German armor, but from a uniquely American military philosophy that emerged in December 1941. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce, commanding the newly formed Tank Destroyer Center at Fort Knox, Maryland, had studied the German blitzkrieg with the analytical eye of an engineer rather than the reverent gaze of a traditionalist. His conclusion was nothing short of revolutionary. Rather than meeting tanks with tanks in heavyweight slugging matches that favored the side with thicker armor, why not create a vehicle that could strike like lightning and vanish before the enemy could respond? Bruce's vision prioritized three characteristics in descending order: speed, firepower, and crew efficiency. Armor protection, the holy grail of German tank design, ranked a distant fourth. This philosophy would have been considered madness within the Wehrmacht, where the inexorable progression from Panzer III to Panther to Tiger represented an unquestioned march toward thicker armor and bigger guns. The Ordnance Department issued requirements for a fast tank destroyer using torsion bar suspension, a Wright Continental R975 engine, and initially a 37mm gun. The design evolved rapidly through various prototypes with different armaments until the T-70 76mm gun motor carriage emerged, destined to become the M18. By July 1943, when the first production models rolled off the assembly line at Buick's Flint, Michigan plant, a vehicle had been created that would challenge the fundamental assumptions of armored warfare. Powered by a 9-cylinder, 350 to 400 horsepower, Wright R975 radial aircraft engine, the same power plant used in the M4 Sherman, but installed in a chassis weighing 20 tons instead of 33, the M18 could achieve speeds that seemed impossible for a tracked vehicle. The Hellcat was capable of traveling at 55 miles per hour on roads, with some sources indicating the vehicle could reach 60 miles per hour under ideal conditions. This wasn't marginally faster than German armor. It existed in an entirely different category of performance. The Panther's maximum speed of 46 kilometers per hour on roads seemed respectable until compared to the M18's ability to maintain 40 miles per hour across rough terrain that would force German tanks to crawl. The roots of German armor dominance lay in the combined arms tactics perfected during the Polish and French campaigns, where panzer divisions operated as integrated units with tanks, mechanized infantry, artillery, and engineers working in concert. The tanks themselves were the armored fist, designed to break through enemy lines and create havoc in rear areas. Speed mattered, but survivability mattered more. German tank development reflected this philosophy, with each iteration growing heavier, more heavily armored, and more powerfully armed. The Panther, introduced in 1943, weighed 45 tons and mounted armor up to 100 millimeters thick on its turret front. The Tiger II, entering service in 1944, pushed these figures to 70 tons and 180 millimeters respectively. The American tank destroyer doctrine, formalized in Field Manual 18.5 and refined through 1943, represented a complete rejection of this approach. Tank destroyers were to be held in reserve, responding rapidly to enemy armor concentrations. Instead of dueling at range like medieval knights, they would use superior mobility to achieve flanking positions, destroy enemy armor from the sides and rear, then redeploy before counterattack could materialize. The M18 had originated in an unlikely place, Harley Earl's design studio, part of the Buick motor division of General Motors. Earl, famous for automotive design, brought a different perspective to military vehicle development, and the result was a vehicle that looked and performed more like a race car with a cannon than a traditional tank. The M18's combat debut came in Italy, where 5 T-70 models were sent to the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion at the Anzio beachhead in spring 1944. The Italian campaign, with its mountainous terrain and narrow roads, hardly seemed ideal for a vehicle designed for high-speed maneuver. Yet even here the M18's capabilities stunned German defenders. These early engagements remained localized, their lessons not disseminated through the Wehrmacht. The German army in France, preparing for the invasion they knew was coming, remained focused on the threat posed by massed Sherman tanks and tank destroyers like the M10, which, while more mobile than German tanks, still operated within conventional parameters. By September 1944, when the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion with its M18 Hellcats joined the U.S. 4th Armored Division near Arracourt, the German army in Lorraine was operating under a fatal misunderstanding. The 113th Panzer Brigade had been formed on September 4, 1944, and by the time it was deployed to Saarburg on September 16, it fielded 42 Panther tanks. Many crew members were veterans of the Eastern Front, where they had faced T-34s and KV-1s in brutal engagements where armor thickness and gun caliber determined survival. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had originally trained on the M3 gun motor carriage, but despite requiring several improvements during testing, the unit had achieved a superlative record and was later issued production Hellcats. The battalion had spent months perfecting techniques that would maximize the Hellcat's speed advantage, developing tactics that would soon revolutionize armored warfare. On the morning of September 19th, as the 113th Panzer Brigade advanced through thick fog toward Arracourt, they expected to brush aside American screening forces and strike deep into the rear areas of the 4th Armored Division. German intelligence had identified Sherman tanks in the area, but noted no significant anti-tank defenses. At 07:15 hours, as German Panthers crept forward through the fog at 5 miles per hour, straining to see through the mist, Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's platoon of 4 M18 Hellcats from Company C, 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, was positioned near the village. The M18s had been in position since before dawn, engines idling quietly, crews scanning their assigned sectors with the patience of hunters. Lieutenant Leiper led his platoon toward the village when he spotted a German tank gun muzzle appearing through the fog just 30 feet away, and he immediately deployed his platoon for action. The first indication the Germans had of the M18's presence came when an American tank destroyer roared to life and accelerated from a complete stop to 30 miles per hour in seconds, acceleration that would have taken a Panther nearly 30 seconds to achieve. The M18 burst from its concealed position like a mechanical predator, raced to a flanking position with breathtaking speed, and fired multiple rounds into the side armor of the nearest Panther before the German turret had traversed even halfway toward the threat. In a 5-minute period that would be remembered as a masterclass in mobile warfare, 5 German tanks of the 113th Panzer Brigade were knocked out for the loss of 1 M18. The engagement demonstrated systematic destruction by an enemy that refused to fight according to the rules the Germans understood. The disparities between the Panther and M18 created a fundamental mismatch in combat capabilities that transcended mere technical specifications. The Panther's turret, weighing nearly 7 tons with its thick armor and long 75mm gun, required 60 seconds to complete a full rotation using its hydraulic traverse system. Under combat conditions, with the engine at low RPM to minimize detection, traverse speeds dropped even further. The M18's turret, by contrast, weighed just over 2 tons, and the speed of turret traverse was dramatically faster compared to the M10, which had a manually rotated turret. An M18 crew could track and engage targets in any direction within seconds, while Panther crews were still struggling to locate the threat. Early feedback from M18 crews indicated that the vehicle could travel hundreds of miles under trying conditions without requiring major repairs to either armament or engine. Crews reported performing only minimal maintenance on the vehicle's moving parts. The Panther, despite its fearsome reputation, suffered from chronic mechanical problems that plagued it throughout its service life. Vinyl drive failures were endemic. The unit was designed for a 35-ton vehicle, but installed in the 45-ton Panther. During the September 19th engagement, several Panthers were abandoned due to mechanical failure during attempted pursuit of the M18s, adding insult to tactical injury. As the morning fog began to lift around 0900 hours, the full sophistication of American tank destroyer tactics became apparent to the surviving German crews. The M18s operated not as individual vehicles hunting for glory, but as a coordinated team using radio communication to vector each other onto targets and warn of threats. Under the direction of Captain Tom Evans, the lead platoon of Company C served as an attractive target for the German tanks, which failed to notice the other 2 platoons of Hellcats advancing on their flanks like wolves circling prey. This was tank destroyer doctrine executed to perfection, one element fixing enemy attention, while others maneuvered for killing shots. The coordination extended beyond individual platoons to encompass the entire combat command's dispositions around Arracourt, which consisted of a thinly held salient using an extended outpost line of armored infantry and engineers supported by tanks, tank destroyers, and artillery. The M18s served as the mobile striking force operating within this sophisticated combined arms system, their speed allowing them to reinforce threatened sectors faster than the Germans could react. By noon on September 19th, the 113th Panzer Brigade's attack had stalled completely. The American platoons continued to fire and destroyed 10 more German tanks, while losing another 2 M18s, an exchange rate that defied German understanding of armored combat. One of the platoon's M18s, commanded by Sergeant Henry R. Hartmann, knocked out 6 German tanks, most of which were Panthers. The mathematics were incomprehensible to German commanders accustomed to favorable kill ratios. Panthers costing 117,100 Reichsmarks each and requiring 2,000 man-hours to build were being destroyed by vehicles that cost $57,500 and could be assembled in a fraction of the time. Poor tactical deployment of the German tanks soon exposed their weaker side armor to Sherman tanks, which flanked and knocked out 11 Panzers using the fog as cover. The Germans, lacking adequate reconnaissance and operating under obsolete tactical assumptions, had advanced blindly into a carefully prepared kill zone. The M18's speed advantage wasn't merely about the engine. Every aspect of the vehicle had been optimized for rapid movement and quick reaction. The M18's design incorporated several innovative labor-saving maintenance features, with the engine mounted on steel rollers that allowed maintenance crews to disconnect it from the transmission, roll it out onto the lowered engine rear cover, service it, and reconnect it. A trained crew could replace an entire engine in less than 2 hours, a job that required a full day on a Panther. Buick engineers had employed torsion bar suspension that provided a steady ride even at high speeds, while German tanks still used leaf spring or interleaved roadwheel systems that limited high-speed travel over rough terrain. An M18 could maintain 40 miles per hour across broken ground that would force a Panther to slow to 10 miles per hour or risk throwing a track. The automatic transmission represented another decisive advantage. The M18 used an innovative torque converter automatic transmission derived from Buick's civilian designs, allowing drivers to concentrate on maneuvering while the transmission handled gear changes seamlessly. Panther drivers wrestled with manual gearboxes requiring double clutching and precise timing, a significant disadvantage in the fluid combat situations the M18 created. American superiority in radio communication proved equally decisive in these engagements. Every M18 carried an SCR 508 FM radio set, providing reliable voice communication between vehicles and with supporting units. German tanks typically had 1 radio per platoon, with other vehicles relying on signal flags or pre-arranged maneuvers that became useless once contact was made. This communication gap multiplied the M18's inherent speed advantage exponentially. American tank destroyer crews could coordinate complex maneuvers in real time, calling out targets, warning of threats, and adjusting tactics instantly as the situation developed. German crews operated in relative isolation, with each tank commander making decisions based only on what he could observe through his limited vision blocks. By September 20th, as the 111th Panzer Brigade joined the battle to reinforce their beleaguered comrades, German tank crews were experiencing something unprecedented in their military careers: genuine fear of an enemy they couldn't effectively fight. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. These were men who had faced T-34s in the frozen hell of Ukraine, who had survived the crushing battles of Kursk, who had learned through bitter experience that German tactical skill and technical superiority could overcome numerical disadvantages. The Panther had been their vindication, a tank that could destroy any Allied vehicle while remaining virtually immune to return fire. Now that hard-won certainty lay shattered like the hulks of their destroyed vehicles, the speed differential created tactical situations that German training had never addressed and their doctrine couldn't counter. Panthers designed as offensive weapons to dominate the battlefield found themselves desperately trying to defend against an enemy that refused to stand and fight according to established conventions. Hellcat crews had learned that a well-placed shot between the mantlet and the glacis plate of a Panther would cause the shell to ricochet into the driving compartment, killing the crew or disabling the tank. This technique required extreme close range and precise shooting that would have been suicidal against an enemy capable of quick response. But the Panthers simply couldn't respond quickly enough. Their ponderous turret traverse, slow acceleration, and limited visibility made them vulnerable to an enemy that had turned every traditional strength into a fatal weakness. The Germans attempted various tactical adaptations to counter this new threat. Some units began operating Panthers in pairs positioned back-to-back, attempting to cover all angles of approach. But this defensive posture required stationary positioning that surrendered all initiative to the Americans. The tactic also assumed reliable communication between vehicles, which most German tanks lacked due to their limited radio equipment. Behind this tactical revolution lay an industrial reality that German officers were only beginning to grasp with growing alarm. The M18 wasn't just faster than German tanks, it was dramatically easier to produce, maintain, and replace. Production had begun in July 1943, and 2,507 units were built by October 1944. Production peaked in January 1944 at 250 M18s per month, with each vehicle requiring approximately 500 man-hours to complete compared to the 2,000 man-hours needed for a single Panther. German tank production had grown increasingly complex as the war progressed and resources became scarce. The Panther required specialized tools, skilled workers, and rare materials that were becoming harder to obtain. Its Maybach engine was hand-assembled by craftsmen, and each vehicle was essentially hand-built, limiting production even when resources were theoretically available. American factories could replace every M18 lost at Arracourt in less than 2 days of normal production, while German Panther production at its absolute peak managed only 380 vehicles per month across all factories, including those destined for all fronts, training purposes, and replacements. The loss of 39 Panthers at Arracourt represented more than a week's total production capacity. As the Battle of Arracourt continued through late September, American crews refined their tactics based on combat experience, developing new methods that would influence armored warfare doctrine for decades to come. M18s began operating in coordinated groups, using their superior speed to overwhelm German defenses from multiple directions simultaneously, creating a level of tactical flexibility that German commanders found impossible to counter. The morning of September 22nd witnessed new tactics that pushed the M18's capabilities to their limits. M18s sprinted across open ground at maximum speed toward German positions near the village, covering ground at velocities that seemed to defy the laws of physics for tracked vehicles. The Panthers, caught completely off guard by the speed of approach, managed only a few wild shots before the M18s were among them, firing at point-blank range into their vulnerable side armor. The psychological effect on German crews was devastating and long-lasting. They knew the Americans were coming. They could hear the distinctive roar of the Wright engines from a kilometer away, growing louder with terrifying rapidity. But knowing and responding effectively were entirely different challenges. The M18s covered the intervening distance in less than a minute, moving too fast for German gunners to track effectively with their ponderous traverse systems. As the battle continued into its fourth day, another crucial M18 advantage became apparent to both sides. The American vehicles demonstrated exceptional mechanical reliability under the most demanding combat conditions. Crews reported that their vehicles could travel hundreds of miles under trying conditions without requiring major repairs to critical systems. The Panther, by contrast, had become a maintenance nightmare that consumed resources and manpower at an unsustainable rate. By September 22nd, the 113th Panzer Brigade reported that many of their losses were due to mechanical failure rather than enemy action. A humiliating admission for crews who had prided themselves on German engineering superiority. Final drives failed under the stress of rapid maneuvering attempts to counter M18 attacks. Transmissions overheated from drivers desperately trying to accelerate quickly enough to respond to American tactics. The M18, built using American automotive mass production techniques and reliability standards, simply kept running through conditions that disabled German vehicles. The air-cooled Wright engine, while admittedly loud, proved nearly indestructible under combat conditions. The automatic transmission required minimal maintenance compared to German manual systems. The torsion bar suspension had fewer components to fail compared to the complex interleaved wheel systems favored by German designers. On September 24th, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, coordinated a combined attack with the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion that demonstrated the full potential of American combined arms doctrine. German tanks would advance slowly and deliberately, drawing German attention and fire, while maintaining the appearance of a conventional tank versus tank engagement, while M18s used their superior speed to infiltrate through wooded areas and dead ground that German reconnaissance had failed to adequately survey. The tactic worked with brilliant effectiveness that surprised even its American architects. As Panthers engaged the advancing Shermans at long range, confident in their superior guns and armor thickness, M18s burst from concealment at multiple points around the German flanks. The German tanks, suddenly caught in a crossfire from multiple directions, couldn't respond effectively to threats that seemed to materialize simultaneously from impossible angles. Their doctrine had prepared them for frontal engagements where armor thickness and gun penetration determined outcomes, not for fluid battles where speed and tactical flexibility trumped traditional advantages. By September 25th, senior German commanders were beginning to understand the true nature of the threat they faced, and their response represented a tacit admission of defeat. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, issued new tactical instructions that essentially acknowledged the obsolescence of traditional German armored tactics. Enemy tank destroyers of exceptional speed operating in this sector. Do not pursue. Do not engage in mobile battle. These instructions reduced the Panther, designed as a mobile offensive weapon capable of breakthrough operations, to a static pillbox. They surrendered all initiative to American forces and acknowledged that German armor could no longer dominate the battlefield through the superior tactics and technology that had brought them victory from Poland to the gates of Moscow. The psychological impact of this admission on German tank crews was profound and lasting. By the time the Battle of Arracourt concluded, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had knocked out 39 German tanks for the loss of 4 M18s destroyed and 3 more damaged but repairable. This remarkable kill ratio of nearly 10-to-1 vindicated American tank destroyer doctrine in the most dramatic fashion possible, proving that revolutionary thinking could indeed overcome evolutionary perfection. The battle demonstrated conclusively that the entire German conception of tank warfare, based on armor protection, firepower superiority, and deliberate tactical movement, could be negated by sufficient speed combined with tactical flexibility. The M18 had proven that a vehicle with armor barely sufficient to stop small arms fire could dominate heavily armored opponents through superior mobility and innovative tactics. The ultimate test of the M18's revolutionary impact came during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. German forces launching their final major offensive in the West initially achieved surprise and breakthrough, but as M18-equipped tank destroyer battalions rushed to critical points, Their speed once again proved decisive in containing the German advance. Team de Sobry, a battalion-sized combined arms task force of the 10th Armored Division, was assigned to defend the village of Novo with just 4 M18 tank destroyers of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion to provide anti-tank support. When they engaged elements of the 2nd Panzer Division, the high-speed highway march of the M18s to reach their blocking positions became one of the few documented cases where the Hellcats' maximum speed was actually utilized tactically to get ahead of an advancing enemy force. The rapid deployment of M18s to blocking positions ahead of German spearheads repeatedly disrupted German timetables that depended on rapid advance to maintain momentum. Panthers and Tigers found themselves engaged by M18s that had raced ahead to favorable defensive positions, using their speed advantage to concentrate at critical points faster than German commanders could adjust their operational plans. The final statistics from the European theater told a sobering story for advocates of German armor superiority. The M18 achieved a higher kill-to-loss ratio than any other tank or tank destroyer fielded by U.S. forces during World War II. Total kills claimed were 526, with 498 in Europe, 17 in Italy, and 11 in the Pacific Theater. The kill-to-loss ratio for European operations was 2.31, and the overall ratio reached 2.41. These numbers became even more impressive when considering that M18s were not primarily employed in their intended role of tank fighting, but were more often committed to improvised missions, usually providing direct fire support for infantry operations. Even when employed outside their design parameters, M18s maintained exceptional effectiveness that validated their revolutionary design philosophy. The fundamental difference between German and American armored vehicle design philosophy was starkly illustrated in the contrast between the Panther and the M18. Both vehicles were designed in response to combat experience and perceived threats, but the conclusions drawn by their respective development teams were entirely opposite. The Germans had studied the T-30 for its sloped armor and powerful gun, and decided they needed something similar but superior. Hence the Panther, with thicker sloped armor and a more powerful gun, an evolutionary response that took existing concepts to their logical extreme. The Americans had reached a revolutionary conclusion that challenged decades of armored warfare thinking. The best armor is not being hit at all. The M18 represented a complete reimagining of what an armored fighting vehicle could and should be, not a mobile bunker designed to absorb punishment, but a precision weapon system on tracks capable of delivering devastating strikes and evading retaliation through superior mobility. The M18's success at Arracourt and subsequent engagements offered profound lessons about military innovation that would influence armored warfare development for generations. The Germans had pursued a linear path of development characterized by incremental improvements: more armor, bigger guns, heavier vehicles. Each generation of tank represented an improvement over the last while fighting essentially the same way, but with greater individual capability. The Americans, constrained by the practical need to ship vehicles across the Atlantic and faced with an enemy that had already optimized conventional tank design, chose revolution over evolution. The M18 didn't attempt to beat German tanks at their own game. It changed the fundamental nature of the game entirely, making traditional metrics of tank superiority largely irrelevant. Throughout the battles around Arracourt and beyond, individual M18 crews performed acts of exceptional skill and courage that demonstrated the vehicle's potential when manned by aggressive, well-trained crews who understood its capabilities. Sergeant Henry R. Hartman, who destroyed 6 Panthers on September 19th, became a legend within the tank destroyer force and beyond. His technique, using terrain to mask approach routes, striking from unexpected angles, and displacing immediately after firing, became the textbook example of proper M18 employment that was taught in training schools for years after the war. On October 13, when elements of the 11th Panzer Division reinforced with Tiger I tanks attempted to retake Arracourt, the resulting battle demonstrated that even the Tiger's legendary advantages couldn't overcome the M18's speed and revolutionary tactics. Tigers lumbered forward at their maximum speed of 15 miles per hour, while M18s raced around their flanks at nearly 4 times the velocity. The Tiger's turret, even slower to traverse than the Panthers due to its massive weight, couldn't track the fast-moving tank destroyers effectively. The story of the M18's development and production was itself revolutionary in ways that extended far beyond pure combat effectiveness. From initial concept to combat deployment took less than 2 years, unprecedented speed for a completely new armored vehicle design. The M18 had originated in Harley Earl's design studio at Buick, where Earl, famous for designing sleek automobiles that captured the American imagination, brought automotive sensibilities and mass production techniques to military vehicle design. The production process utilized standard automotive manufacturing techniques that allowed workers who had built civilian Buicks to transition to building Hellcats with minimal retraining. Unlike German tanks, which required skilled craftsmen and specialized tools available only in limited quantities, M18s were constructed using standard automotive components wherever possible, dramatically reducing production complexity and time. The M18 incorporated numerous technological advantages that multiplied its battlefield effectiveness beyond what raw specifications might suggest. The vehicle's fire control system, while simpler than German optical rangefinders, proved faster to employ in the fluid engagements that characterized M18 combat operations. The periscopic sight could be operated independently of the main gun, allowing the commander to search for new targets while the gunner engaged current ones, a capability that German tanks lacked due to their integrated sighting systems. German tank commanders had to rotate their entire turret to observe different sectors, making target acquisition slower and more obvious to alert enemies. The M18's ammunition storage represented another significant advantage in terms of crew survivability. Rounds were stored in protected bins designed to reduce the probability of catastrophic explosion if penetrated by enemy fire. M18 crews could survive hits that would completely destroy German vehicles, allowing experienced crews to remain in combat and continue accumulating tactical knowledge. As 1944 progressed into 1945, American tank destroyer doctrine continued evolving based on accumulated combat experience. While the initial concept of massed reserves responding to enemy tank concentrations rarely materialized as originally envisioned, M18s found themselves supporting infantry divisions in roles their designers had never anticipated, providing mobile anti-tank defense and direct fire support with remarkable effectiveness. This doctrinal flexibility proved to be another crucial American advantage over German forces. While German Panzer units remained wedded to increasingly obsolete tactical concepts that emphasized armor protection and firepower over mobility, American forces adapted continuously to changing battlefield conditions. M18 battalions developed innovative techniques for urban combat, forest fighting, and river crossing operations, situations that their original designers had never envisioned but which the vehicle's inherent flexibility allowed them to master. By early 1945, the German armored force found itself caught in an impossible strategic situation, partly created by the M18's demonstrated success against traditional German tactics. Unable to match American mobility advantages, German tanks were increasingly relegated to static defensive positions that surrendered all tactical initiative to Allied forces and made German armor vulnerable to artillery bombardment and air attack. The production situation had become equally dire for German forces. German factories, disrupted by systematic Allied bombing campaigns and starved of critical raw materials, struggled to maintain even minimal production levels. Meanwhile, American factories continued producing M18s and other armored vehicles at rates that seemed impossible to German planners accustomed to craft production methods. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Forces and father of German armored doctrine, reluctantly recognized the broader implications of American success. The M18 wasn't merely a tank destroyer. It represented the physical manifestation of American industrial and tactical superiority that Germany could not hope to match. Germany could not win a mobile war against an enemy that moved at twice their speed, nor could they prevail in a production war against an enemy that could build equivalent vehicles in a fraction of the time using a fraction of the skilled labor. The Rhine crossing operations in March 1945 provided final validation of the M18's revolutionary impact on modern warfare. As German forces desperately attempted to concentrate armor to prevent Allied crossings, M18s repeatedly raced to critical points, often arriving hours ahead of German reinforcements despite starting from more distant positions. At Remagen, When the Ludendorff Bridge was unexpectedly captured intact, M18s were among the first vehicles to cross, using their superior speed to establish bridgehead perimeters before German forces could mount effective counterattacks. Panthers and Tigers rushing to contain the bridgehead found M18s already established in carefully prepared ambush positions, turning what should have been a German advantage into another demonstration of American tactical superiority. The M18's influence didn't end with Germany's surrender in 1945. During the Korean War, 650 early production M18s were converted into M39 armored utility vehicles by removing the turret and fitting seats for up to 8 men in the open fighting compartment. These M39s proved the enduring value of the basic chassis design and roles far removed from its original tank-destroying mission. Perhaps more revealing were reports from former Wehrmacht officers serving as advisors to the new West German Bundeswehr in the 1950s. When evaluating American armor designs for possible adoption by German forces, these veterans universally recommended against heavy tanks in favor of mobile systems directly inspired by M18 design philosophy. The men who had once commanded Tigers and Panthers now advocated for speed and mobility over armor protection, a complete reversal of traditional German thinking. The psychological impact of the M18 on German tank crews persisted long after the war's end. In post-war interviews and memoirs, veterans consistently rated the M18 as the most feared American armored vehicle, ranking it ahead of the M26 Pershing heavy tank or tank-killing aircraft like the P-47 Thunderbolt. The M18 had achieved something remarkable in military history. It had not only defeated German armor tactically, but had broken the psychological superiority that German tank crews had enjoyed since their victories in Poland and France. The hunters had become the hunted, and the psychological scars of that reversal never fully healed. The numbers tell the complete story of the M18's revolutionary impact on armored warfare. Design was initiated in December 1941, with the first prototype tested in April 1943. Production began in July 1943, reached peak output of 250 units per month in January 1944, and ended in October 1944 with 2,507 total vehicles produced. Combat performance statistics were equally impressive. 526 total enemy vehicles claimed destroyed, 216 M18s lost in combat, yielding a kill-to-loss ratio of 2.41. The mechanical readiness rate of 78% compared favorably to any armored vehicle of the era. Speed comparisons revealed the true extent of American advantages. M18 Hellcat achieved 55-60 miles per hour on roads and 26 miles per hour cross-country, while the Panther managed only 29 miles per hour on roads and 15 miles per hour cross-country. The Tiger reached 24 miles per hour on roads and 12 miles per hour cross-country, while the massive Tiger II could achieve only 21 miles per hour on roads and 10 miles per hour cross-country. The contrast between Panther and M18 represented fundamentally different philosophical approaches to armored warfare that would influence military thinking for decades. The Germans had perfected the traditional concept of the tank as a heavily armored, powerfully armed, mechanically sophisticated fighting vehicle. They had pursued this concept as far as it could logically go, producing vehicles like the Tiger II that represented the ultimate evolution of World War I tank development principles. The Americans, with the M18, hadn't built a better traditional tank. They had created something entirely different that made traditional tanks less relevant to modern battlefield conditions. By prioritizing speed over armor, mobility over raw firepower, and mechanical reliability over engineering complexity, they had developed a weapon system that challenged decades of accepted armored warfare doctrine. The influence of the M18's revolutionary design philosophy extends far beyond World War II into modern armored warfare concepts. Contemporary doctrine emphasizing mobility, situational awareness, and networked operations over pure firepower and protection can trace its intellectual roots directly to lessons learned from the M18's battlefield success. Modern main battle tanks like the Israeli Merkava, American M1 Abrams, and German Leopard 2 all incorporate fundamental lessons from the M18 experience. These lessons include the critical importance of mechanical reliability under combat conditions, the decisive value of superior situational awareness through advanced optics and communication systems, and the fundamental nature of tactical mobility in determining battle outcomes. While these modern tanks are indeed heavily armored, they prioritize speed and agility to a degree that would have seemed impossible to World War II German tank designers committed to static protection concepts. In the years following the war, veterans from both sides reflected extensively on the M18's impact and the revolution it represented. American tank destroyer crews spoke with justifiable pride about their vehicles' capabilities and the tactical revolution they had participated in creating. German tank crews, even decades later, remembered with vivid clarity the fear and frustration of facing an enemy that refused to fight according to established conventions and rules they understood. At a commemorative ceremony held at Arracourt in 1985, veterans from both sides walked the same battlefield where the M18 had first demonstrated its revolutionary potential 41 years earlier. German and American veterans, now elderly men united by shared experiences of combat, exchanged stories and acknowledged the fundamental transformation that had occurred on those fields. The ceremony included a demonstration of a carefully restored M18, which even 4 decades later could still achieve its remarkable top speed that had once terrorized German tank crews. As the restored Hellcat raced across the same field where so many Panthers had met their destruction, the German veterans watched in contemplative silence, a lasting testament to the enduring psychological impact of the revolution they had witnessed firsthand. The story of German tankers encountering the M18 Hellcat represents far more than tactical innovation or technological superiority. It embodies a fundamental revolution in military thinking that would reshape warfare for generations to come. This was a pivotal moment when an entire philosophy of armored combat was rendered obsolete by a radically different approach that challenged every assumption about how tanks should be designed, deployed, and employed in battle. The Germans had achieved near perfection in traditional tank design, taking the concept as far as engineering and metallurgy would allow with magnificent vehicles like the Tiger II that represented the absolute pinnacle of conventional armored fighting vehicle development. The Americans, with their M18 Hellcat, hadn't simply built a better traditional tank. They had created something entirely revolutionary that fundamentally altered the nature of armored combat itself. The German tankers who faced M18s at Arracourt and countless other engagements across Europe weren't merely outfought in tactical terms. They were confronted with irrefutable evidence that their entire approach to armored warfare required fundamental reconsideration from the ground up. Their heavily armored Panthers and Tigers, engineering marvels though they undoubtedly were, became vulnerable and ultimately obsolete when faced with an enemy that refused to engage on traditional terms that favored armor thickness and gun caliber. With 526 enemy vehicles destroyed against 216 M18s lost, the raw numbers tell an important part of this revolutionary story. But the true victory achieved by the Hellcat was psychological and doctrinal in nature. The M18 proved conclusively that wars could be won not necessarily by the side possessing the biggest tanks or thickest armor, but by the side that could adapt most quickly, innovate most effectively, and implement new concepts with the greatest speed and flexibility. In the final analysis, the German tankers who survived their encounters with the M18 Hellcat carried with them a profound and lasting lesson about the nature of warfare itself. In military conflict, as in biological evolution, survival belongs not always to the strongest or most heavily armored, but most often to the most adaptable and flexible. The M18 Hellcat, racing across the battlefields of France at speeds that seemed to defy the laws of physics for tracked vehicles, firing with deadly accuracy and vanishing like a mechanical ghost before retaliation could be organized, represented that crucial adaptability in its purest and most effective form. The revolution in armored warfare thinking was now complete and irreversible. The age of pure heavy tank dominance was ending, challenged by irrefutable demonstration that mobility, flexibility, and tactical speed could indeed triumph over raw firepower and armor protection when properly applied. The German tankers who witnessed this transformation firsthand understood, even if they couldn't fully articulate it at the time, that they were observing not merely a tactical defeat, but the birth of entirely new concepts in mechanized warfare that would influence military thinking for decades to come. Their experiences, carefully preserved in military archives and detailed historical studies, stand as permanent evidence that sometimes in warfare, speed and tactical agility can indeed defeat armor thickness and gunpowder, especially when that speed reaches 55 to 60 miles per hour and comes equipped with a high-velocity 76mm gun operated by well-trained, aggressive crews who understand how to maximize their vehicle's revolutionary capabilities. The M18 Hellcat had accomplished something far more significant than simply destroying German tanks with impressive efficiency. It had systematically destroyed German certainty about the fundamental nature of armored warfare, shattered long-held assumptions about tank combat that had been validated by years of successful operations, and demonstrated beyond question that revolutionary thinking applied with sufficient determination could indeed overcome evolutionary perfection, no matter how technically advanced. For the German tank crews who faced these remarkable American vehicles in the morning fog at Arracourt and in countless other engagements across the European theater, the Hellcats represented not merely a new enemy weapon system, but the dawning of a completely new era in mechanized warfare, an era where, as the ancient proverb promised, the race would indeed go to the swift and speed would triumph over steel.